Project is going to be making a flower vase or a pen holder, and this is made out of copper and red brass. So the copper stock I got was a piece of 3-inch pipe. Now copper pipe comes in 3 different thicknesses: N, M, and K. K is the thickest, and it has a wall thickness of about 1/8 of an inch, and obviously that makes it heavier, so it can hold a lot of flowers without tipping. Plus it gives it a nice heavy solid feel to it. Now I bought a stick of this copper on Amazon.com, but any large plumbing store would carry it. It's fairly expensive because copper runs more than $10 a pound right now. I actually hammered the finish in here, and you can see the little dimples to give it, a nicer look. And then I put these brass rings around it and polished it up, and then put a coat of urethane on it. It also has a bottom on it, obviously, so it can hold water. So I'm going to go over how I made this. And first of all, I chopped it in a abrasive chop saw. If I had a hacksaw chop saw, then it would probably come out a little bit better. But my solution was to take a regular palm sander and start with a 40 grit on it, and as you can see, it's beginning to flake off here, and I have to take a little bit more off, and then I'll change it to an 80 grit, and then I'll change it to 120 grit, and that will get it to be fairly smooth. It's not a very difficult process. So the next thing I will do is take it and put it on the high-speed polisher and polish it so it has a really nice finish. And I won't show you that step because you can polish it by hand, or there's a lot of different other ways that you can polish it. And then I'll show you the next step, which is the peening, and that is really fairly straightforward and simple. And the edge distorts a little bit easier. So you need to give it a pretty hefty blow, as you can hear. And I rotate the piece, and I do about 1/2 inch at a time. You need a hefty blow so that you put a decent dimple in the copper. And I just keep rotating it. This process will take about 30 minutes. Kind of time consuming, but I think in the end it's worth it. I've done a few of these with just polished along and put a brass ring on it. They don't look nearly as good as the ones with the dimples. The next thing is to put the bottom on the vase, and I use this as my template, and it passes through, and it has a little slop in it. So when I marked out my bottom sections, I used my compass and made it approximately 1/8 inch larger than this, so it would fit tightly. I've tried to put just a regular circle in here, but the inside has been distorted from the hammering, plus the ID is never perfect on a pipe anyway. So I found that the best way of doing this is to make it a little bit bigger, pound it in place, and then it's much easier to solder and you get a nicer job. So let me finish cutting this out, and This is a fairly old pair of shears, I'd say at least 50 years old, but it's sharp and it cuts perfectly. The only downside is it probably weigh about 3 pounds. Okay, so I put the maker's mark on this before I started so that people that get it know who made it. And I'm cutting right around this line. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect like some of the other circumferential cutting that I do by hand, because you'll see in the next step it's going to be pounded down. Okay, so okay, so I'll take my template and I'll take a regular tinsmith sheet metal hammer, and I'll start going around it and pounding it down, trying to get the edges even. And even if they're not quite even, it's not a big deal. I can see that I need a little more on this, a little bit more on that, and I'll go around until I get it about even all the way around the die. So now I'll do my final circumferential hammering, and I'll show this piece to you in a minute. Okay, as you look at this, you can see how the edges turned up on a 90-degree angle. This is actually pretty uniform all the way around, considering that it's just a hammering process. So then I slip it in here, and obviously it's oversized. And I'll put my die on it. And gently pound it down, and although the edges weren't perfectly 90, this will help them achieve that. And then I put my extension piece on, and I keep pounding and pounding and pounding. And then I take a little bit of a helper here. Whoa! Okay, so it went completely through. So that means it's perfect size. Okay, so here we are. I finally just put the piece back in place, and I usually leave about 1/8 of an inch off the bottom, and that's how I take care of the bottom. The next thing will be making the brass rings that go around it. The next step is to solder the back of the brass plate so that when we wrap it around, it's already what is referred to as being tinned. So then we just have to heat it up and tightly clamp it, and then it adheres. So this is a soldering iron. This is 550 watts. This is really the big boy in my collection of soldering irons, and it's certainly appropriate for this. It will make it go pretty quick. Obviously, the more heat you have when you do a tinning process, the better off you are. Now, I'll continue to put on solder paste. I use basically no corrode. It's available, of course, on Amazon. And this will start to go faster as the plate heats up. And you don't want to have it too thick, because if it's too thick, then when you heat it, some of it can leak down onto your copper. But you want it thick enough so that it does adhere. So now I'm going to take the tin sections and cut them for the rings. And my ring spacing, or my ring width, is 7/16, 5/8, and 3/4. So I'll go over to my shear and I'll cut one. Then the next thing I do is I have to trim it so it goes around the diameter, and it's generally right around 9 15/16. Okay. Then I wrap it around to see what it looks like. And it's fairly close. So then I actually put it in a clamp, and starting from the top here, I'll put it on and make sure it's equal all the way around. Sometimes the clamps don't want to work so well. There we go. And voila, success at the first time. Now a lot of times when I cut these, they're a little bit long, and you know, when you're trying to take off, then you start nibbling away like less than a 1/16 at a time. So I have already pre-done the next two, so we don't have to go through the process, which we've already gone through. And I'll put them on, and I'll put a little solder around the circumference, or solder paste I should say. So as you recall, they're already tinned. Now when I put this one on, okay, bring it down, and then I'll put the next one on, which is a 7/8 thick one. And my goal is always to have the opening between the two pieces when they come together to be a 1/16 inch or less. If they overlap, then that's no good either. But we're actually pretty good right now with this one. I'll tighten it as tight as I can. And as you can see right here, the gap is certainly pretty decent. Okay, so now the middle one, which I told you is 5/8 of an inch. And I'll line this guy up here like this. Then I'll start tightening it. I'll heat up my soldering iron. This is a 300-watt soldering iron, and it's got a diamond point on it. And I'll use that to the final solder. So I always start from the bottom because heat rises. Now I usually try to go around this 2 times, and actually I can see the solder melting. You have to really add a little extra heat at the adjustment screw. So now I'll go around and put a little no-crode on the top. And it still needs a little more heat. Okay, now I'll take my solder. This is 60-40, 60% tin, 40% lead. Okay, so as you can see, the bottom is soldered in place, and this thing is hot, hot, hot. This heavy-duty glove, obviously, is a pretty big help. So the next thing I'll do is take and I'll put water in it to make sure the bottom doesn't leak. Well, this is the finished product. As you can see, it looks really quite nice, and I always finish hand polishing it. I use this product here. It's called Simichrome Polish. It's available on Amazon. It's made in Germany. I've used it for 50 years. It's the best in the industry for this type of thing. If you don't have a high-speed buffer, and a lot of times they're kind of dangerous to use because if you have like a lantern or something, it's easy to get it caught in one of the pieces and then it will just tear it out of your hands. So I always use 004 steel wool and then polish it. You get the same result, just a little more work. Now I'm going to take it out and I'm going to spray paint it with Hellman's spar urethane, and I'll spray it with gloss. And when I get done, it will look like this, and that will last for 20 years. So thanks for watching. Bye.